Hello and welcome to the qualifying edition of this weekend's race weekend's data analysis for the British Grand Prix. Now, qualifying has sort of been a little bit thrown up into the air with the whole sprint race / sprint qualifying, and then you get the pre-qualifying on the Friday, which is what we're going to be delving into today for the data, as it was the traditional, standard, lovely Q1, Q2 and Q3. If any of the data gets released for the sprint race, I might make a video about that, but I haven't quite decided yet, as I personally don't think it's going to be too fantastic. It's only going to be 17 laps. We shall see. But today we're going to be comparing all of the data that has come from the Friday qualifying that didn't result in a pole position. It resulted in a Pirelli Speed King, which just sounds horrible. Anyway, with all of that negativity out of the way, let's just scrap all of that. Let us jump on into the qualifying data for the British Grand Prix, and we start not this time with the Audience Prediction Championships, because that is coming tomorrow for the sprint race. We will instead take a look at the overview for qualifying for the sprint race, and in Q1, knocked out was Yuki Tsunoda of all drivers. And then unfortunately Kimi Raikkonen was also knocked out too, as well as Nicholas Latifi, who was about 0.6 off of his teammate, as well as the two Haas cars. With Mick Schumacher being within half a second of Nicholas Latifi, and Mazepin actually being a little bit closer to Mick this weekend. He was only 0.3 down. Then comes Q2, and Russell storms to another Q3 appearance, his second consecutive Q3 appearance. Bear in mind, we've only had one practice session for the British Grand Prix, and he was well down that order to turn it around and to put it into Q3. We were all on the same tyres. There's no sort of tyre strategy in qualifying for this particular qualifying anyway. Everyone gets to choose what they want to start on for the sprint qualifying. It's all a bit interesting, but for everyone to be on the same level playing field and to get there again on pace, that's impressive. Mighty, mighty impressive. And also out are the two Alpines, along with Pierre Gasly. A little bit of a shock exit, in my opinion, for Pierre Gasly. And so that leads us off into Q3 for the Speed King Awards, the fastest qualifier for the... there's so many weird names for it. Anyway, here is Q3. It is Lewis Hamilton who will start from the front of the grid for the sprint qualifying session. F1's first sprint qualifying session, just 700ths in front of Max Verstappen. There was a little bit of a tow given, well, a lot of a tow given actually to Lewis Hamilton from Valtteri Bottas, and then he buggered up his last lap. This 1:26.1 was set on his first lap in Q3, and he sort of got a little bit happy on the throttle in his second run. Charles Leclerc went a mega P4 and Perez only P5, 6/10 down on his teammate Max Verstappen. That is enormous. Then the two McLarens, uber close, just 0.02 in it. And then again, George Russell out-qualifying a Ferrari and an Aston Martin. But now mushing all of these times together onto a graph, we end up with something that looks a little bit like this. An exceptionally dull progressions graph. There is literally no characteristics to this whatsoever, apart from Verstappen and Hamilton being in a league of their own. Had Valtteri Bottas not put in a decent Q3 run, those two drivers would have been clear. Absolutely gone. Now, taking each team's fastest lap times from each of the three sessions, regardless of which driver set it, we can work out their improvement from Q1 to Q2. Alfa Romeo actually lost time from the two sessions. They lost 0.02 of a second, with Mercedes gaining a whopping 7.5 Williams gaining 6, Red Bull gaining just under half a second. Then doing exactly the same for the improvement of Q2 to Q3, it is Mercedes who loses time. They lost 0.1 of a second, whereas McLaren gained just over 0.2 and Williams gained 1.5. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at each of the teammates and compare them together, and we're going in 2020 championship order, so we start with the two Mercedes and we will end with the two Williams. Everything is timestamped in the description down below, so please feel free to skip to whichever team you would like me to talk about. So on screen now is the Mercedes teammate comparison. Valtteri Bottas is in the turquoise and Lewis Hamilton is in the black. We can see each driver's positions in the three qualifying sessions on the graphs on the left, as well as their head-to-head battles in each of those three sessions. with Lewis Hamilton comfortably being in front in all 3 of those sessions, with a nice consistent 7/10 difference between the two in Q1 and in Q2, whereas in Q3 this was slashed to 2/10. But we can see that if Hamilton had followed Valtteri Bottas's projection, he would have definitely dipped into the mid 1 minute 25s. And so from Mercedes, we'll take a look at Red Bull, and again a nice chasm between the two drivers. 3/10 in Q1 in that top right graph. 7.5 very similar to Bottas and Hamilton in Q2, and then 6/10 in Q3. That is a whopping great big chunk. Perez's average, which is just at the moment over, I think it's just over half a second at the minute, is edging closer to what we've seen with Pierre Gasly and also Alex Albon as Max Verstappen teammates. But taking a look back at the comparison, we can see that the qualifying head-to-head is 9-1 so far this season, which is absolutely ridiculous. And comparing the gaps in the top right to the average gap ahead for Max Verstappen in the bottom right, we can see that in all 3 of the sessions, he was so much quicker than the average ahead of Sergio Perez so far, apart from Q1. Those were very similar. There was only a 400th difference between those. But Q2, there was a 4/10 difference. And then in Q3, there was a 10th difference. Then from Red Bull, we'll take a look at McLaren, and for once, Daniel Ricciardo was actually consistently ahead of Lando Norris, right up until Q3, where the gap was 0.02 of a second, and for the first time this year, he was actually ahead in Q2. But other than that, there really isn't too much else to report from the McLaren qualifying. It was a little bit disappointing. They were only, P6 and P7? I was expecting just a touch more, especially from Lando Norris as well, considering he was at home and on the front row 2 weeks ago. I was expecting just a squidge more. But Daniel Ricciardo definitely having a decent qualifying for the sprint race. Let's hope they can do a little bit better. Then from McLaren, we will take a look at Aston Martin. And again, a little bit of an interesting session. Sebastian Vettel dominated, absolutely dominated Lance Stroll. Over half a second up in both Q1 and Q2. And if we look at the averages for the first 9 races of this season so far, his average ahead in Q1 is just under 0.3, and again the same, just under 0.3 in Q2. So he is significantly faster in this British Grand Prix qualifying. But whether that is Stroll slowing down, Sebastian speeding up, or sort of both at the same time, it's things like that that you never really know and you can never really interpret. But not to see both Aston Martins in Q3, I think, is a little bit of a disappointment, but we can see what will happen in the sprint race. We'll never know. One of them could have an incident, or an incident could happen further up in the field, and they could definitely progress up. And so from Aston Martin, we will now take a look at Alpine. Now, I am actually a little bit disappointed in Alpine. I was expecting just a touch more from both drivers, especially Fernando Alonso, who looked menacing in Q2. But unfortunately, he was knocked out by, I think it was George Russell. If it wasn't George Russell, it was someone who set the lap time after, but it could have been George Russell. Ocon as well looked very promising in Q1, actually getting out for the first time in 2 races, but alas, didn't get much further than Q2. With the gaps being very, very reduced compared to the averages in the first 9 races so far. Then from Alpine, we'll take a look at Ferrari, and this was just Charles Leclerc's day in red. Carlos Sainz was ahead in Q2, but that was it. An absolutely mega lap in Q3 for Charles Leclerc secured P4 overall, with a gap of just under 0.2 between the two of them in Leclerc's favour, which admittedly is about half of the season's average so far, which stands at just over 0.3 in favour of Charles Leclerc. Then from Ferrari, we'll take a look at AlphaTauri, and like I've already said, it is a touch disappointing for Yuki Tsunoda, having not made it at all into Q2, and then seeing Pierre Gasly again not even make it through to Q3. So this is a very disappointing qualifying session for the AlphaTauri squad, with the gap in Q1 being 4.5 really, between the two drivers, which is just over a 10th up on the average in Pierre Gasly's favour so far. Then from AlphaTauri, we'll take a look at Alfa Romeo. Again, I am a little bit disappointed, especially in Kimi Räikkönen. I don't know what is going up with Kimi Räikkönen. He's been out in Q1 for 4 consecutive races so far. I think that's the first time that's happened for a very long time. It does definitely look like Kimi Räikkönen has lost that little speed edge that he used to have. However, he can definitely make up positions in the race, and his opening laps have usually been exceptional, so watch out for him in the sprint race. You never know, he could end up in a P12 or a P11 come the end of 17 laps. Then penultimately from Alfa Romeo, we'll take a look at Haas. And again, there's just nothing to look at in these graphs because they never make it through to Q2, and especially they never make it through to Q3 either. With the gap in Q1 in Mick Schumacher's favour being 3/10, which like I said in the opening portion is actually less than the season's average so far, which stands at 4/10. So Nikita was a little bit closer to Mick in the British Grand Prix qualifying. But other than that, this is the 3rd consecutive race where they have qualified P19 and P20, or at least ended the traditional Q1, Q2, Q3 qualifying in P19 and P20. And then finally we will take a look at Williams. George Russell, what a qualifying. Once again, on pace at a track where they really didn't look like they were going to even get through to Q2 come practice 1. He makes it all the way through to Q3 and qualifies P8. There was a 6/10 gap between the two of them in Q1, which is absolutely mega. The season's average so far is just 3.5 tenths. So that just shows how much George Russell was pushing, and you heard the crowd erupt when he went over the line. Whenever he went round a corner, exactly the same with Lewis Hamilton and also for Lando Norris. But other than that, there really isn't too much else to report from Williams, but it's definitely going to bode well for George Russell in the sprint qualifying. However, does it? Actually, does it? Because he's now got to hold on to this P8 for 17 laps. Yes, he may be able to make up a position or two, but is he going to be able to fend off the likes of Carlos Sainz, Sebastian Vettel, the 2 Alpines behind him? Is he going to have the race pace for 17 laps to be able to hold that position and then start the Grand Prix in the same good position? I don't know. Who knows? And there we go. There is all of the data concluded for the Friday qualifying session for the British Grand Prix. Like I said at the start, if there is anything that gets released or published or I can access essentially for the sprint race, then of course I'll try and make a video about that, but probably not on the Saturday as I am very pushed for time due to work and stuff like that. So I might make one in the summer break just to see if the sprint race actually worked. Personally, I am in 2 minds about it. I really do not know how it is going to work out. But please let me know in the comments down below what you thought was the most interesting thing about all of this data that I've just presented. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next episode of whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.